I'm so excited to teach you how to make this black and white challah. It is gorgeous and it smells incredible with that delicious fresh baked bread smell and of course the chocolate. Sally that girl in the kitchen. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sally That Girl in the Kitchen. In today's episode, I'm going to teach you how to make a fun and different challah. So, I know you must have heard of black and white cookies. They are a classic, half black, half white. So I'm going to do a little twist and I'm going to make a black and white challah. So this is a two-toned challah and half of it will be infused with chocolate, and both the black and white will have chocolate within, but the white side will have some semi-sweet chocolate chips, and then the dark side will have white chocolate chips. So of course, it is a chocolate-filled, luscious and delicious challah that you are going to love. I'm going to be doing dairy, but of course you can use non-dairy white chocolate chips and semi-sweet chocolate chips also to make this a non-dairy version. That is totally up to you. So I'm super excited to teach you how to make this. So let's not wait another second and let's get started. For the white side of the challah in today's recipe, you will need 1 1/3 cups of bread flour, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/8 cup of sugar, plus another 3/4 of a teaspoon separate, 1/2 cup of warm water, 1 1/8 teaspoons of active dry yeast, 1 1/3 tablespoons of vegetable oil, plus another 1/2 teaspoon separate, and 1/2 cup of semi-sweet chocolate chips. For the black side of the challah in today's recipe, you will need 1 1/3 cups of bread flour, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/8 cup of sugar plus 2 tablespoons added to it, plus another 3/4 of a teaspoon separate, 2 tablespoons of unsweetened cocoa powder, 1/2 cup of warm water, 1 1/8 teaspoons of active dry yeast, 1 1/2 tablespoons of vegetable oil, plus another 1/2 teaspoon separate, 1/2 cup of white chocolate chips, and 1 egg, which we actually will be using for both the white and black side because we will be using it to make our egg wash. You will also need a bench scraper or a knife, some oven mitts, a dough whisk, or you can just use a large fork instead, a pastry brush, a small handheld roller or a rolling pin, a spoon, a fork, some measuring spoons, some dry measuring cups, some wet measuring cups, a baking sheet or tray and some parchment paper, a cooling rack, a bowl, and then 2 large bowls that have lids, or if not, of course, you could always use plastic wrap. And you will also need that plastic wrap to cover your challah as it rises, but of course you could also use a challah cover or a clean kitchen towel. So now that we have all of our ingredients and tools together, let's get started. So the first thing you're going to want to do is prepare your 2 large bowls, and I'm going to be adding my bread flour to each of the bowls. So I'm going to be making my black dough on the right and my white dough on the left. So once you've measured out your flour into each of your bowls, just use the back of your measuring cup to create a well in the center of the flour. So you do it in one, and then you repeat the process, and you do the same thing in the other. So now measure out your sugar, and you're going to notice that the black dough will have a little more sugar than the white dough because we will be using unsweetened cocoa powder in that black side of our black and white challah. So we need a little extra sugar in that one. And then measure out your sugar and add it to your white dough. Now, you're going to also add your salt. So the amount is the same. We're going to add some salt to our white dough. And then you're going to repeat that and add your salt to your black dough. And yes, I realize that the dough will not actually be black. It'll be more on the brown side because we're using unsweetened cocoa powder in it. So we're going to add that into our black dough. I'm just using the play on the black and white cookie, but obviously the tones will be more like brown and beige. So now I'm going to measure out my water in 2 different containers, and I'm going to take them over to the microwave and warm them up for about 30 seconds or so. It's not a lot of water, so you don't want it really, really hot. And then you're just going to measure out your yeast for each of these 2 containers of water, and you're going to add them. And then you're going to do the same with your sugar. So this is the same amount of yeast and the same amount of sugar for both of these. So once your sugar is in, which is really going to help feed that yeast and really activate it, then you're just going to grab your spoon and you're going to give it all just a little bit of a stir just to incorporate that sugar. And then you are going to do the same for your other container. And then we're just going to let this sit for a full 5 minutes. We want 5 full minutes to let our yeast get nice and bubbly. So once 5 minutes have passed, then you're just going to grab one and you're going to pour it in the center, right there in that well. And then you're going to do the same thing to the other bowl. Now, we are going to then grab our dough whisk, and then you can work on either one, the white or black side, it's fine. I'm going to mix my ingredients together, and I'm just going to bring everything together and make sure that all that dry flour is exposed to that nice, warm, bubbly mixture that we just poured in. So now we're going to measure out our oil, and you'll notice that for the white side, it's a little less oil than for the black side, because in the black side, we're adding that cocoa powder. So there's a little more of that dry ingredient. So we're going to need just a touch more oil in the black side. So be careful when measuring out your oil and make sure you use the right amount. And now I just cleaned off my dough whisk, and then I'm going to switch to using my hands. Of course, there's nothing like bringing a dough together with your hands. You're just going to use the dough itself to pick up all of that dry flour at the bottom and sides of your bowl, and you're going to notice how quickly it just starts to come together and form a nice cohesive dough. Now, I will mention, sometimes if you overdid it a little when you measured out your flour and you notice that it's really not coming together, then you could always drizzle just another touch of oil at this point if you need it. But mine worked out perfectly. You see, just by working it, I was able to pick up all of the flour from the bottom of my bowl. So now I'm going to do the same process with my black dough. I am going to mix all of the ingredients in. I just want them to start to come together. Once I feel they are starting to combine, then I'm going to measure out my oil and I'm going to add that in, remembering that this portion is using just a little more oil than the white side. And then I'm going to pour that in and I'm going to continue to mix and just bring all of this loveliness together. And then, of course, I'm going to clean off my dough whisk. And as I did before, I'm going to switch to bringing my dough together with my hands. And the same comment that I made earlier applies here. With this amount of oil and water, you should be able to bring all of your ingredients together just by working them with your hands. But if you notice they are not coming together, then you could always add a tiny little drizzle more of oil. So I've brought my dough together, and then since my hands are already chocolatey, I'm going to knead this one first. It doesn't matter if you do your black or your white dough first, but the idea is to knead it for a full 10 minutes since we're doing this by hand. If you were doing this with a machine, then 4 or 5 minutes would suffice, but we're working with our hands after all. So you can do it right in the bowl, you can do it in your hands and just kind of stretch that dough out. And of course, you can also do it on your counter. So now you're just going to measure out that half a teaspoon of vegetable oil. It's very little. And the purpose of this is just to keep our dough from drying out as it rises. So what I do is I just use my hands and I just make sure to cover the top and bottom and all around with that little touch of oil. And then that's it. All I want to do now is cover my dough because I don't want it to dry out. So I'm going to use my lid, and of course if you don't have a lid, then plastic wrap would be perfect. Now we're going to set that one aside and we're going to work on kneading our white dough. So it's exactly the same concept. All you're going to do is knead it by hand for 10 minutes in the bowl, in your hand, stretching it out on the counter, however you're more comfortable working. And if you're going to be doing it on the counter, then of course I'm using a quartz countertop, which is amazing and nothing sticks to it. It's just really great for kneading. But if you needed to, you could always sprinkle a little bit of flour on your work surface to help with the kneading process. So now I've kneaded my white portion of challah for a full 10 minutes. I've added it back to my bowl and I'm drizzling it with that little touch of oil. And I'm going to do the same as I did with the black dough. I'm just going to cover it ever so gently with that touch of oil. Then I'm going to cover my bowl. Now, once my bowls are covered, I place them in my oven turned off. Anywhere that's draft free is great. And then I set a 2-hour timer to allow my dough to rise. But if you're using the oven, I always like to set out a note to remind people not to turn that oven on because you don't want them ruining your beautiful dough. Now, after 2 hours have passed, I just pull out both of my bowls and I'm going to uncover them. And look at how beautiful the dough is looking already. So it's definitely risen. The yeast has done its magic and it's looking beautiful. So this is actually my favorite part. You're going to punch down your dough to let out the gases that have built up as your dough has been rising. So I just love doing this. And at this point, your dough even has a scent to it. The dark side actually smells almost like a Tootsie Roll. It's smelling divine. So now it's time to work on our dough. So what we're going to do is we're just going to flip one of our bowls and then release the dough onto our work area. And then we're going to use either a bench scraper or a knife just to cut that dough down the middle and create 2 portions. So then I just kind of like to roll one portion up. And then I'm going to do the same with the other portion. I just kind of roll it up. And that's it. We're going to set that aside for a second. And then we're going to do the same with our black dough. We're going to turn our bowl over. We're just going to help release the dough from the bowl. And then we're going to place that dough onto our counter. And I kind of make almost like an oval shape out of my dough once I bring it down onto my counter because I find it's easiest to divide that way. And then I just cut it right down the middle. And then just like I did with the white dough, I am going to just kind of roll the dough up. Just make like a little roll. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other piece. Now, I've created 4 pieces because I'm going to make a 4-strand challah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 1 black piece and 1 white piece and then another black piece and another white piece. So basically, I'm just alternating the colors of the dough. Now, you'll notice I didn't need any flour at all on my counter, but if you did, then of course just sprinkle your counter with a little bit of the flour and you're good to go. So Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll out my dough. So I'm using this handheld roller, but you could use a rolling pin, of course. I just love the control I get from this individual handheld roller, because that way I could line my dough up next to each other and I could just roll one piece out at a time. I just love the precision I get when using this type of a roller. But of course, you could put all 4 pieces out and just roll all 4 of them at once with a rolling pin if you want to also. That's totally okay. I just really love doing it this way. It just really gives me control of my dough. So I am not going to make these very long. I want to make them a bit wide because I'm going to fill these up with a lot of chocolate. Plus, I like to keep them a little short because as the challah dough rises, it will grow, but it'll give me this beautiful puffy finish, and it's just going to be fantastic. So don't go super, super long on your strands. So now I've done white, black, white, and now I'm going to do my final one, my last black one. And then for good measure, I'm just going to go over each of my pieces one more time just to make sure they're nice and flat on my counter and they're all ready to be filled. So now I've measured out my chocolate chips. So I'm going to be using white chocolate chips on the dark dough and my semi-sweet on the white. So this is truly the black and white part of this recipe because of course we've established that the dough itself is not technically black and white, but it's close enough. So the chips are definitely white, so we're gonna add those on to our black dough, and I'm using plenty of chips. So I measured out a half a cup of each. So basically for each strand, we have a 1/4 cup of chocolate chips. So there's a total of an entire cup of chocolate chips in this challah. So it's definitely chocolatey and absolutely delicious. It's funny because when I develop these recipes and I just put things together in the kitchen, I don't normally measure my ingredients out. So I was astonished by the amount of chocolate that I add to this challah, but it's well worth it. It's gonna be super, super good. So now I just grab the edge of my dough, and of course I have a lot of chips. So what I do is I just use my hand and help hold those chips in and just kind of push them in as I bring my dough over them. And then once I get them all covered by the dough, then I continue to just turn the dough over and make sure that they get trapped inside that strand of dough. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my next strand. See, I just kind of use my thumbs to help me hold those chocolate chips in, bring the dough over to cover them. And then once I have, I just continue to turn the dough over onto itself. And then as I fill each strand, I'm just kind of bringing them together at the top because of course we are going to be braiding these. So I'm just kind of putting them in position. And then of course I'm going to move on to my third strand, just repeating the same exact process. You'll notice that the dough barely sticks to my counter whatsoever. And oiling that dough at the end, that little drizzle of oil really, really helps. And then finally, I'm going to do the same for my fourth strand. And then once all of those chips are in, I'm going to bring them all together here at the top. And then I'm going to braid. So I'm going to get the strand from the right and bring it to the left, and the one from the left and bring it to the right. Now that first strand that I brought over, I'm going to be bringing down to the center. And as I braid, I like to try to keep that seam in the dough facing down, facing my counter. And now I'm going to replace that strand with the second from the right. Now I'm going to bring down the one from the right. And then of course I'm turning that seam down, and I'm going to replace that with the second from the left. Bring down from the left, replace from the second from the right. Bring down from the right, replace with the second from the left. So now bring down from the left, and once you can't bring down any more, then just pinch your ends together, tuck them under a little bit, and you are good to go. You have braided your 4-strand challah. So how beautiful does this challah look already? It's gonna be gorgeous and delicious. So now I place it on my tray, which I've prepared with some parchment paper, and then I'm covering it with some plastic wrap or a challah cover or a really clean kitchen towel. So I'm gonna set a 45-minute timer to allow my challah to rise. And then when there's about 15 minutes or so left on my timer, I set my oven to 350 degrees to allow it to preheat. Now, my challah has been rising for 45 minutes and it's puffy and beautiful, and my oven is nice and hot. So now I've beaten an egg in a bowl and I added just a touch of water to it to make my egg wash. And then I'm going to use my pastry brush and I'm going to give the entire challah a beautiful coating of this egg wash. And this is just really gonna make our challah nice and golden. It's really just gonna do wonders to that crust. It's just gonna be absolutely gorgeous. So now as a final touch, and to add a little bit of black and white to our black and white challah, I like to use my chips and just decorate the seams. I just look for the seams of where my black and white dough meet, and then I scatter a few of these black and white chocolate chips into those seams, and it also kind of reveals the contents of this delicious challah. So I love it that this little decorative touch reveals so much. So look at how gorgeous this challah is looking. It's ready for the oven. Now we're gonna place this challah on a center rack of our preheated oven, and I'm gonna set a 15-minute timer. And after 15 minutes, I'm gonna turn the challah around and set another 15-minute timer to allow it to finish baking. And it is looking gorgeous. Look at that beautiful challah after 30 minutes. It smells amazing in here. The smell of fresh baked bread combined with chocolate, there's nothing better. So now very carefully, what I like to do is grab one end of my parchment paper and I like to slip the challah right off of the tray and onto the cooling rack. And then I very gently and carefully, of course the challah is still quite hot, so very carefully place the challah onto my cooling rack. And I allow it to cool a bit, because even though I am tempted, I can't cut into it just yet. It is piping hot and it needs a moment to just settle. But that chocolate inside is getting all melty and delicious, and it is smelling so, so good right now. I just cannot wait. So give it a minute to cool before you place it on a cutting board, because you don't want it steaming up and making the bottom of your challah moist. So once it's cool enough, you can transfer it over onto a cutting board, and then of course admire it for a moment, because it's just gorgeous. It's just really a cute looking challah that's going to be so much fun, and everyone is just going to be in awe, because not only is it adorable, it's super, super delicious. So I've waited long enough. It's cool to the touch, but still warm. And I'm going to cut a few slices of this challah to take a look at what's going on inside. Wow, just look at the colors already. I mean, that's pretty black and white, isn't it? Close enough. And with the chocolate, of course, that really helps the idea of black and white. But really, it is just wow, wow, wow. It's smelling so good. And of course, I'm smearing up all that chocolate on the inside because it's still warm. So as I'm cutting it, of course, it's getting a little on the bread itself, but who minds? Because look at how amazing that challah looks. And I'm telling you, it tastes just as good. The addition of the chocolate to the dough, that unsweetened cocoa powder really does something special to it. And look at that chocolate running throughout, and the contrast of the dark chocolate on the light dough. Wow. Oh my. So amazing. And that white chocolate in the dark dough. I just love the contrast in colors. The texture is super. It's just perfect. So good. It just comes apart. You just pull apart this challah. It's light and fluffy. It's just got that perfect chewy challah texture. It's just divine. Look at how beautiful the strands of gluten are. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And delicious. So good. The bread itself is divine, and the addition of the chocolate just makes it all that much better. Now tell me that's not a beautiful black and white challah. Gorgeous, filled with melty, delicious, semi-sweet and white chocolate chips. You are really going to need to make this challah to believe how good it is. So how totally pretty is this challah? It is so adorable. I absolutely love the contrasting colors. It's just perfect. And of course, it's filled with 2 types of chocolate. How can it not be divine? It is just absolutely delicious. When you serve it warm and that chocolate gets all melty, it is just beyond. You are going to love it. Trust me. No, better yet, don't trust me. You're going to have to try to make this recipe yourself. And of course, if you've enjoyed today's recipe, don't forget to like, comment, and share. I love it when you give me a like, when you write your comments. So thank you to those of you who are always commenting on my videos. I really, really appreciate it. And of course, I love it when you share my videos with your friends, because that really gets my message out there, and it really gets so many people to see all these amazing recipes that I put so much love into. So thank you for doing that. And of course, if you're not already subscribed to my channel, don't forget to subscribe and to make sure to touch that little notification bell so that you get notified every time I put up a new, fun, amazing, delicious, different recipe for you. And also be sure to explore my video tab, because under that tab, you're going to find so many recipes that are already up there. You are going to love so many different things that I've already made. So make sure to check those out. And if you're not already following me on social media, make sure to follow Sally That Girl in the Kitchen on Facebook, Instagram, and on Pinterest. And you can follow me as Sally That Girl FL on Twitter, Snapchat, and on TikTok. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Sally That Girl in the Kitchen.